Mickey had a rough transition into 3D. Guys, do you remember Mickey 06? Remember? Guys, Mickey 06? I know it was released like 15 years ago or something, and it has been talked about to death, but the contract says I have to bring it up. Okay. All jokes but one aside. The Mickey franchise is one that I have a weird connection to. I'm gonna say it up front, I'm not a Mickey fan. I've never been one. I've only played a handful of games, and up until like the last few years, I've only played like 3 Mickey games. I had Mickey Advance 2 on GBA, but didn't think much of it. It was okay, I guess, though later I would hear my friends say it's one of the worst Mickey games, which was funny. I also had Mortimer the Mouse. That was a game I remember really wanting as a kid, and I'm not sure why. It was probably the guns. Eventually I would try Mickey 2, which I did manage to beat, but only by abusing save states. I had a hard time getting into it. It wasn't like the kinds of platformers I was used to, so it was a real struggle for me. That was the extent of my experience playing Mickey games, but despite not playing many of these games, I still had a connection to the series thanks to YouTube. For some reason, I ended up watching and really quite enjoying a lot of Mickey-related content, whether it be Let's Plays or reviews. Brain Scratch Comms and Some Call Me Johnny, along with a variety of other creators, are the source of this. I stumbled upon their videos and was hooked. And it didn't take too long before, despite not having played many Mickey games, I was quite familiar with a lot of the franchise. There was just something interesting about hearing people talk about Mickey. It's hard to describe, but I think a lot of it has to do with how inconsistent the series is. Now, a lot about that has been said already, so it'd be pointless to go over that. But because of that inconsistency, it brings out a lot of passion from the fans. So while I wasn't playing these games, I was learning a lot about them. But I never got to the point of actually wanting to play any of these games. They just didn't seem like my thing. Until I heard about Cuphead. Look, I'm running out of ideas for parallels here. It's an indie game heavily inspired by the classic Mickey games. And I thought this game looked really cool, so I ended up getting it and really liking it. I liked it so much that I started wanting to give the classic Mickey games another shot. Particularly Mickey 3 and Pete. Well, I wouldn't actually get around to doing that for quite a while, but when Mickey Mania was announced, well, that gave me a good excuse to finally try to get into the classic Mickey games. And then I proceeded to not play it for like 3 years, and only got it because a friend gifted it to me. Better late than never, I suppose. But after that, I did end up playing all the other classic games, finally experiencing 3 through Mickey 3 Air, which is an awesome fan hack. I still wouldn't call myself a Mickey fan. Hell, maybe not even a classic Mickey fan, since of all these games, I only really have a high regard for 2 of them. Didn't really like the first game, and while 2 and CD have cool qualities, they're both flawed in different ways that, while I respect them a lot, I wouldn't go back to them often. 3 is excellent though. But it's Mickey Mania, specifically Mickey Mania Plus, that's the subject of this video. Normally I wouldn't want to jump into an entry this late in a series without covering the previous ones, even if only accounting for the classic games. But I don't really have much of a desire to cover 1, 2, or CD. The only other one I would have an interest in covering would be Mickey 3 and Pete, but that game has had a lot of coverage already, and I'm not sure what I could say about it that others haven't already said, probably better than I could say. Now the same could probably be true for Mania, but I think there is some value in talking about this one from the perspective of someone who isn't a Mickey fan. Someone whose platformer experience was largely shaped by Bugs Bunny and Taz Country, now getting into a classic-style Mickey game. Especially since, while I did technically play 2 first, Mania is really my first true experience with classic Mickey. So, let's get right into it.
In the red corner!
Oh, did you think this was going to be like last year's April Fool's video? Nah, this is a legit review. There's not much to the story here, like at all, so it starts pretty similarly to Mickey 3. Mickey and Pluto go to Angel Island, which is in the sea for some reason that I'm not really sure why. But they run into a group of the Mad Doctor's robots who are uncovering the Phantom Ruby. As soon as they do, it pulses out, which teleports everyone to Green Hill Zone while transforming the robots into the hard-boiled heavies. They take off and shortly after regroup with the Mad Doctor, who takes the ruby, and it once again teleports Mickey elsewhere. And so the rest of the game is Mickey and Pluto tracking down the Mad Doctor to take away the Phantom Ruby, fighting the hard-boiled heavies and even Metal Mickey along the way. You find out the Mad Doctor is building a gigantic robot, the Titanic Monarch, which was foreshadowed, so you infiltrate it and destroy it. Normally, after you defeat the Mad Doctor, you just escape as you watch the machine explode. But if you have all the Chaos Emeralds and are playing as Mickey, you get sucked into a portal where Heavy King betrays the Mad Doctor trying to take the ruby. Kinda weird how this is the only time Heavy King even appears. You don't fight him before this point. Now turning into Super Mickey with the emeralds, you fight both of them off, then get sent into another portal, and the game kind of ends. Weird ending, though it's like this to set up for Mickey Forces. But there's Encore Mode, which takes place after all that, but it's a repeat of the main story. Only difference is you rescue Donald and Goofy, then Heavy Magician takes the ruby, and uses it to revive the other heavies. Everything after this is exactly the same. The Mad Doctor trusts Heavy King again, though he doesn't betray him this time, but that's it. Kind of weird. Pete has his own story, but it's not that different. He's chilling on Angel Island, not even noticing that it's in the ocean, when the heavies, having just got the Phantom Ruby, bump into him, sending him to Green Hill, where his adventure is exactly the same as Mickey's. The only real difference is instead of going to fight Heavy Rider and Lava Reef, he goes down to check on the Master Emerald, to which Heavy King is trying to take. He remembers what happened when the Mad Doctor did this in 3, which is funny, and makes sure not to make the same mistake. Pete actually gets to fight Heavy King, which is cool, but that's where the differences end. It's not like Mickey 3 and Pete, where the Pete playthrough took place after Mickey's, and had more changes with a new final boss and ending. It's just the same, with one real change being the encounter with Heavy King. The story here is serviceable, I guess. The hard-boiled heavies are neat, but there's not a lot going on here. You'd probably think that it's a platformer, so what does the story matter? But 3 had some really cool storytelling, actually. There's the conflict with Pete, where he was tricked by the Mad Doctor into fighting you, and he messes with you all game. But when he's betrayed and the Mad Doctor takes away the emerald, he helps you out. There's a constant goal you're after, which is preventing the Death Egg from launching. It crashed on the island after Mickey 2, and the Mad Doctor has set up shop here, building a launch base to get the Death Egg fueled up. But you stop it and it falls again. But it actually manages to launch after the Mad Doctor gets the Master Emerald, and you travel through it and have one final battle out in space as he desperately tries to hold on to the emerald. There's some pretty cool environmental storytelling, like seeing the Death Egg in Lava Reef, and you see its power when it melts the place. The Death Egg has a big presence, but outside of some small foreshadowing, the Titanic Monarch doesn't have this presence. And 3 does a pretty good job of fleshing out Angel Island as a single location, which shows how everything is connected, how the levels transition to each other. Mania is very scattered. While some locations connect to others, and in cool ways, a lot of the time you're being teleported to a completely different place. Even when you're not teleported, it could just be a dramatic shift, like going from Hydro City to Mirage Saloon. They took the tornado, so it's not a big deal, but Hydrocity is on Angel Island, Mirage Saloon is not. You don't get a sense of what the world looks like. You start off in Green Hill, but then are teleported to Chemical Plant. Chemical Plant is connected to Studiopolis, and you hitch a ride on the Flying Battery after that, which is cool. After that, you jump off and land in Press Garden, but it's unknown how far the Flying Battery took you. You get teleported to Stardust Speedway, which is on Little Planet. Then you get teleported to Hydro City, which, as previously mentioned, is on Angel Island. Then you go to Mirage Saloon, and from there you go to Oil Ocean, which is on the same island as Chemical Plant and Studiopolis. So are we going in circles? But then you get on a flying sub, and that takes you back to Angel Island. And then you go back to Little Planet, where you go through Metallic Madness, and then that's where Titanic Monarch is. You go all over the place in this game, going back and forth between the Mickey 2, 3, and CD locations, which are 2 separate islands, and a different, if small, planet, and the single Mickey 1 location, which is also another island. This is the advantage that 3 had, where it was one location that you progressively went through, and because all these locations were on the same island, it gave the setting a rich sense of character. Mania does not have a setting. It's all over the place, so it lacks any character. And that's ignoring that it's made up of past games' locations. Now this is a Celebration title, so it kinda had to use old locations. And I will say, they made a good effort in trying to tie all these locations together. It mostly works. Not as well as 3, but it works well enough. It's just a bit silly when you think about how much back and forth there is. But there's nothing else to really say about the story. This game went back to the visual style of the games it is emulating, but it isn't restricted by them. It looks like them with the same pixel art style, but is more detailed and has more fluid animations, and I think it looks really good. I really love high quality pixel art, the kind that goes beyond a 16-bit. I also love low poly models, and what's great is when they are combined. There's something about a mix of high quality pixel art with low poly models that just works really well. Now, there aren't a whole lot of 3D models here, but when there are, it looks cool, like the special rains, the wireframe effects, the background when fighting Metal Mickey is cool, and of course these special stages that look right out of a 5th gen game. I love this kind of stuff. I only wish it was used more. Now, this game obviously is using the same art style as the classic Mickey games. And I always found it to be a rather interesting art style, because it's like an in-between of Bugs Bunny and Taz Country. What I mean by this is Bugs leans really far into the abstract. I'm mainly talking about the 2D games, by the way. The terrain is very abstract, and it doesn't look natural at all. Taz, on the other hand, is very naturalistic. It has very natural-looking environments. Now, the first game wasn't perfect, as there were floating platforms at various points, but even then they still look pretty natural, and the series would play into this as it went on. Mickey, however, merges these, making really abstract looking environments that are also pretty naturalistic. Take Green Hill with these naturally forming loops and the ground having a checkerboard pattern. They play into the abstractness of having loops, ramps, floating platforms, weird patterns in the soil, and all this is just how the world naturally looks. Even the man-made structures have this weird, messy, loopy design to them. And then there's Stardust Speedway, which is a combination of weird mechanical parts that are covered in plant life. And then in the future, the plants are gone and it's like a giant brass instrument. I have no idea what all this is, who built it, or why, but it looks so cool. Now you might say that Bugs also plays into its abstractness in a similar way, but it doesn't do it nearly as well. There is weird stuff here, but it's so basic. It's so abstract that it stops looking like a place at all. It doesn't look like this is what the world is like. Instead, it looks like someone copy and pasted pre-made assets to construct a level. Mickey really sells its world being like this by being overly detailed. Bugs is so simple and plain that it just feels boring to look at. This looks artificial, and not in an interesting way. Mickey embraces its abstractness and comes out with this weird chaotic energy to it that works really quite well. Bugs just doesn't even try. Mickey absolutely outdoes Bugs here. Taz, on the other hand, well, I can't say one or the other does it better than the other, because they both are going for a different style, and they both handle them really well. That's really up to preference, but it is interesting the progression of these 3 series going from complete abstraction to making the abstract natural to just being natural. Now, for an aspect of the visuals that isn't handled quite so well, the theming. Mickey has been having a bit of a new Super Bugs Bunny issue for a little while. Basically, reusing the same themes over and over again. And while it's not quite as bad as Bugs, it's still a bit of an issue. There is a reason for it here. It was either reusing themes or only having 4 levels. So I can't blame the developers for this. And they did the best with what they got. But at the same time, Green Hill Zone again. This level aesthetic is constantly reused that it's comical at this point. This is a Celebration title, so it makes sense to bring the first level of the first game back, but Mickey 4 and Mickey Generations were also Celebration titles, and both of them brought back Green Hill as well. Not only that, but Mickey Forces brought it back, and that was the same year as Mania. Even Chemical Plant, which isn't reused as much, was also in both Generations and Forces. Now, the rest of the reused themes are ones that either haven't come back since the game they came from, or aren't often reused, so it's not a big deal. It's just that Green Hill and Chemical Plant are tiring. and could have been replaced with something else. Like, why not have Angel Island Zone be the first level? You go there in the intro, but don't get a level out of it. You get a small section of it in Encore Mode, but it's not a full level. But whatever. Despite the reusal of themes, they do new things with them. Not quite to the degree as Taz Country Returns, but there are still cool stuff here. Now, 4 of the levels are completely new themes, and these levels stand out so much. They are super creative and just gorgeous to look at. Studiopolis is one big movie studio. Press Garden is a printing press making propaganda, which is a really cool concept. Mirage Saloon is probably my favorite theme in the series. And Titanic Monarch has a great atmosphere to it. These zones show a lot of potential that unfortunately wasn't reached. Imagine if the whole game was original zones. Again, there is a reason for this, and it's better this way than the alternative, so I'm willing to give some leeway. Regardless of reused themes, this is a pretty damn good looking game. Now for the music. Mickey games are often highly regarded for their soundtracks, but I'm not that huge on them most of the time. Not that I think they're bad, just it's usually a few tracks at most from some games I rather like, but am indifferent to the rest of the music. There are some exceptions. I really like Mickey CD's Japanese soundtrack, and Mania is right up there with it for me. Now this is a great soundtrack. Though most of it is remixes of past tracks, as you'd expect when most of the levels are from past games. But even remixes of tracks I didn't care for in their original form, I rather like here. Chemical Plant was one I didn't really care for in Mickey 2. But here, while it's not a huge change, the change is enough for me to like it much more. And the Act 2 version is even better. Like with Mickey 3, each level has 2 versions of its theme for each act. The first act being pretty close to the original version, while the second act deviates more. Though for the Mickey 3 tracks, the Act 2 version is still similar to 3's Act 2. And I think these remixes are nearly universally superior to the originals. I liked Flying Battery in Mickey 3. But the Mania version? Much better. Feels richer, more complete. Oil Ocean was alright in 2. But the Mania version... Now I like that. The Act 2 version is even better. Kind of reminds me of Shantae music. Now, I said the remixes are almost universally superior. The tracks where that becomes a question is the CD tracks. Now, that game had 4 different versions of each level's track, so it's a bit more complicated which versions are remixed. For example, Stardust Speedway. Act 1 is the past, so you'd guess it would be a remix of the past version from CD. But it doesn't seem to specifically be the past version, just a slower version of the track in general. it has a completely different vibe. Now, the present version does have a similar vibe to CD's present version. But there's a lot of differences to the point it's hard to say it's specifically a remix of the present version. It's less like they remixed Stardust Speedway past and present, and more like they made two new versions of Stardust Speedway, though the Metal Mickey boss fight is much closer to the Bad Future version. All that said, I really love Stardust Speedway, all versions of it, and I have a hard time saying whether I prefer the CD or Mania versions more. I prefer CD's present version more than Mania's Act 2, but Mania's Metal Mickey is definitely better than CD's Bad Future. And I'm just completely undecided on CD's past versus Mania's Act 1. Now for the other CD level, Metallic Madness, it's not one-to-one, but it's easier to see the similarities to CD's past. To Mania's Act 1. As well as CD's present. With Mania's Act 2. And once again, these are great remixes. And again, it's a bit hard to choose which version I prefer. But I think I am leaning more towards Mania's versions being better. But yeah, they took more liberties with the CD tracks, which I think works really well. Almost wish they were more like this with the other remixes. All this time I've only talked about remixes, but the original music for the original zones are phenomenal as well. Studiopolis Act 1 is simply amazing. I was listening to this all the time, well before I even played the game. Mirage Saloon, though. Oh, this zone has 3 versions, and all 3 of them are my favorite tracks in the game. And some of my all-time favorite Mickey music. I think the Pete version is my favorite. And then Titanic Monarch is great too. It is such a good atmosphere for the end of the game. Man, I went on longer than I thought I would with the soundtrack, but I think you get the point that this music slaps really hard. But let's move on. So the classic Mickey games that Mania takes after are 2D platformers, but they are quite distinct from most other platformers. They are primarily known for their high-speed platforming and momentum. Now, other platformers can be fast and momentum is important to them, but Mickey takes those elements and exaggerates them. In other games, you can go from standing still to full speed almost instantly, but in Mickey, you need to build that speed up. You start off really slow, but as you continue to move, you get faster. In other games, slopes or hills won't do much to slow you down, but in Mickey, you need to build up momentum by going fast in order to go up slopes. You also build up speed when going down, and by holding down, you'll start rolling, which builds up even more speed. That is what Mickey is all about. Being able to keep your momentum up to get through the levels as fast as possible. The way you control can be tough to get a handle on if you're not familiar with it. It can feel sluggish, imprecise, and just like you're out of control. But the primary challenge is to learn the intricacies of your movement to be able to keep going without stopping. Now normally you have to slowly build up speed, but by crouching and repeatedly pressing the jump button, you can rev up a spin dash. After letting go, you will rocket forward while rolling. The more you rev up, the faster you go to a certain extent. This keeps up the pace, so even if you get slowed down, it's not super punishing. You have 5 playable characters. Each one controls the same and can perform the spin dash. But each character has a unique ability that changes a lot about how you play them. Mickey has the drop dash. While jumping, if you hold a button, you'll activate a mini spin dash once you land. It's not as strong as a normal spin dash, but still very useful for keeping momentum up, especially when jumping to other platforms. Pluto can use his tails to fly for a limited time. It lasts a decent amount of time, but he will tire out after a while. This is really useful for exploration. However, it is pretty slow. You can go fast with it as it does carry momentum, but only going left or right. Going up is really slow, and going down is even slower as you can't cancel the flight until you land. When playing as Mickey, you have the option to either play as him alone or have Pluto follow him. He can help in some situations or be a hindrance. You have no control over him, but you can have him activate his flight by pressing jump while holding up while in the air. When he's doing this, you just have to jump into him to grab on. And now you control him like how you do when playing as him, but you can jump out at any time. This is really useful, though can be a bit hard to use. It's easy to accidentally drop dash when trying to activate it, and depending on the momentum, you could just land as soon as you grab on. Pete has quite a few differences. He has a lower jump than the other characters, which can make it quite a bit tougher to navigate. To make up for this, he can glide. Gliding cancels your momentum, and there's a cool off for when you land, so it can be a bit slow. However, if you glide long enough, you'll slowly get faster, and if you glide into a wall, you'll start climbing it. He can climb up nearly any surface, so he's also pretty good for exploration. Though because of the low jump, things can still be rather restrictive. Pete can also break things without going into a ball, and even break walls the other characters can't. Donald is kind of disappointing. He's not a bad character and can be fun to play, but he's the least interesting. So his ability is the hammer drop, where he quickly drops down to the ground, which can destroy certain things other characters can't, and defeat enemies the others can't. He can also bounce off spikes or other hazards while in a ball without taking damage, though he can only do this once and will take damage right after. There's just not a lot you can do with him. Like, it's nice to not take damage from spikes, but that doesn't add much. Just avoid them. And the hammer drop, while satisfying use on enemies, is not a good replacement for everyone else's abilities. He has no way of getting to some higher areas where every other character can. Even Mickey, when he has Pluto, can do this. But then there's Goofy, and Goofy is just plain fun. He doesn't have any special attributes, he only has his exclusive ability, which is a more advanced form of flight than what Pluto has. While holding the button in the air, you'll sort of glide, but not in the way Pete glides. From here, pushing forward points you down, where you start dive bombing. You can pick up a lot of speed doing this. Pulling back will slow you down, but depending on how fast you're going, it brings you up even higher than where you started. Remember Super Bugs World, the Cape Feather power-up? Yeah, it's like that, but way better because it carries momentum. is more challenging to use, requiring more skill to maintain flight, and thanks to the level design you can't easily cheese it by flying over the entire level. It's tough to effectively use this because you're vulnerable while doing it, but when you use it right, it is so much fun. Some levels are too contained where there's not much use for it, and if you're at the top of the screen it will cancel it, which is kind of annoying, but otherwise, this is such a fun ability. Most of the characters bring something interesting and fun to the table. Even Donald, the weakest character, is not unfun to play as, and this adds a lot of replay value to the game, which is a big point to it. It's a short game, but because of the way it's designed and the extra characters, it gives a lot of reason to play through it multiple times. With how fast you can move, there is a worry of just dying because of enemies or hazards that you couldn't react to. Now, this shouldn't be a problem if the level design is good enough, but to make level design that is both fair and challenging while letting you move this fast is a difficult task. The older games struggled with this. The screen space didn't help, but they had a solution that I have mixed feelings on: the ring system. The ring system continued for the entire series, and is still present in Mania. There are rings littered everywhere, and aside from adding to your score or giving you an extra life when you get 100, their primary purpose is health. If you have no rings, you will die instantly from any damage, but if you have at least one ring, you will survive that hit but lose the ring. It doesn't matter how many rings you have though. 1 ring or 100, you lose all of them when taking damage. You can recollect them though, as they will be bouncing around for a few seconds before disappearing. If you have a lot of rings that get hit, most of them will disappear instantly, so you won't be able to pick up all of them. The ring system is something I'm a bit conflicted on. It is an interesting health system, but it feels a bit like a band-aid fix for sloppy level design. Now, that mostly applies to the older games, as I do think for the most part Mania is designed well enough that it doesn't need a band-aid, but it still does carry a bit of the flaws of the system. The ring system can discourage getting better at the game because if you don't really care about score, you practically don't get punished for taking damage. You can take a hit, pick up at least 1 ring, and continue like nothing happened. There are incentives to hold on to your rings, like score and lives, but if you're like me, you don't care about score, and the game isn't hard enough to where getting lives is essential. Rings are also used to enter bonus stages and use your super forms, which I'll talk about later, and those are better incentives, but they are also things you could just ignore. I don't think the ring system is a bad system. It is a cool idea where you have to scramble to pick your rings back up, and there is a challenge in trying to maintain a high ring count, but it can be abused and doesn't have a good enough incentive to try and keep a high ring count if you're not interested in score or the super forms. This is something I don't really have a solution for without making a lot of changes to how enemies function. Cuphead had a normal health bar, but most of the enemies there didn't do contact damage. They had to actively attack you, which worked rather well, but I'm not sure if that would be best suited to Mickey. Regardless, Mania isn't really hurt by the system, but it doesn't fix the issues inherent with it either. Throughout the levels, you can find power-ups and monitors. You can get extra lives, which I don't see much of a point for. You can get speed shoes, which for a limited amount of time make you move much faster. There's invincibility, which is self-explanatory. Ring monitors give you 10 rings, and hyper ring monitors, which when you get hit, instead of a bunch of your rings just disappearing immediately and leaving only a few left to pick up individually, you'll drop fewer but bigger rings that are worth more, making it possible to get all your rings back, or at least most of them. The main power-ups you want are the shields. There's the normal blue shield, which just gives you an extra hit and nothing else. But then there are the elemental shields. These will protect you from small projectiles as well as protect you from their element. The fire shield protects you from fire and lava. The electric shield protects you from electricity, though that's not that common, and the bubble shield allows you to breathe underwater. The shields also can have an effect on the environment. Like the fire shield can burn certain things like these bridges or oil, and the electric shield can magnetize you to certain surfaces and it attracts rings to you. The bubble shield doesn't have a special effect though, but is the only one that can be used underwater. Going in water with the others will get rid of them. And that's not all these shields can do. Well, for most characters, that is. But when using Mickey, you get a new ability for each one. The fire shield gives you an air dash that acts as an attack. The electric shield gives you a double jump, and the bubble shield allows you to bounce. Now you might think the blue shield is kinda useless, and yeah, the other shields are just upgrades for most of the characters, but there is actually a benefit to the blue shield when playing as Mickey, because the elemental shields don't allow him to use the drop dash, but the blue shield does, which is nice. But it would also be nice if there was some purpose for the other characters. This game is divided by zones, which consist of 2 acts each. Each act ends with a boss, so 2 bosses per zone. The end of Act 1 has a bit of a mini challenge where the sign falls and you can bounce it around, and depending on where it lands you can get some extra rings or a shield, though you can't see where they are. Though you'll lose all your rings when the next act starts, which makes ring boxes pointless. You can wait to pick them up when Act 2 starts, but sometimes you automatically transition into a new area, making it so you can't pick up the box. Beating Act 2 has you opening an animal capsule. No challenge here, but I find it fun to have the characters jump off it. Pluto is the only one who can't do it, which is lame. Even Donald can do it. And Goofy you'd think can't, but he slightly moves back, so if you're just on the edge you can send him flying. Anyways, after beating a zone, you roll right into the next one. No map or level select, just keep going forward. Talking about the level design itself is tricky. The level design is very different from other games. While Bugs or Taz games have simple layouts that are filled with obstacles and hazards you need to overcome, Mickey's levels are, well, just take a look. The idea of trying to analyze the level design was very intimidating, because look at them. While playing through these levels, you might not think too much of the level design. When you take a step back and look at them, they are huge and all over the place. It's hard to tell where you're going from a glance, or to figure out what leads to what. It's very confusing. And these levels are big, much bigger than other games. Given the importance of speed, the levels kind of have to be big, otherwise they wouldn't last very long. They need to give you room to go fast. It's tough to really discuss the level design because of the sheer size of them, and how fast you could go through them. These levels hit you with platforming challenges, obstacle challenges, and speed sections all in quick succession. Each level has a lot of things going on. While some level design and challenges may be copied a few times, it's not a lot. It does a good job at varying the layouts and building on the challenges. Oftentimes you'll get long stretches of level where nothing really happens. You'll be going really fast, but with nothing to get in your way. These are speed sections, and the purpose they serve is spectacle. Spectacle is something that a lot of people don't seem to understand the benefit of. Spectacle can add some spice to make things more thrilling. Without some kind of spectacle, it can leave some platformers to be rather dull. The newer Taz Country games thrive in spectacle. There's so much thrill to those games because of spectacle. Would this level really be better without the saw blade destroying the track behind you and creating the obstacles in front? Would it really be better if those obstacles were already there and you weren't chased at all? No, it would be less interesting. The spectacle makes this level so thrilling. It wouldn't be Sawmill Thrill without the saw. Now, Mickey Mania doesn't quite offer spectacle to nearly the same level as Returns or Tropical Freeze, but those times you're moving incredibly fast through the level, being flung around, going through loops, all the while you're still in control, that's spectacle, and it serves the same purpose. Remove the speed sections from the levels, and what do you get? Less thrilling, less interesting, less spectacular, less fun levels. Sure, they are largely automated, but automation isn't always a problem, and it doesn't get too excessive here to take away from the rest of the level design. But on top of the levels being big and fast, they are pretty non-linear. Other platformers have mostly linear level design, but Mickey is all about branching paths. There's one destination, but multiple ways to get there. Generally, the higher paths are the ones that are faster and more rewarding, but harder to get through, though the lower paths aren't just to punish you. You can play these levels multiple times and have a different experience depending on what paths you take, though it can be easy to just keep going down the same paths every time. I kind of feel bad every time I forget to take a different path and just end up playing the same way as last time. But there's plenty of opportunities to change paths all throughout the levels. This, combined with the 5 different playable characters, does add quite a lot of replay value. You can beat the game in a couple hours, but the game gives plenty of incentive to come back to it. These levels are quite impressive with how they are designed. A lot of thought would have been needed for this kind of level design to work, a ridiculous amount of thought. You would need to balance platforming, enemy placement, and exploration, all with multiple paths while encouraging speed. A level that gives you multiple paths, has satisfying platforming challenges, good enemy placement that doesn't feel unfair, and designed in a way that you can blaze through it if you're good enough. It looks very chaotic and sloppy, but they had to plan out everything. Despite how complicated they look, when you're playing it, it really doesn't feel as complex or overwhelming as it appears. And I don't think people really appreciate how hard it must have been to make these levels work, because it would be so easy for it to fall apart. For example, with how fast you move, it would be very easy for poorly placed enemies to ruin a level. Enemies in 2D platformers tend to be very simple, and that's no exception here. Enemies provide a small obstacle to overcome quickly to keep up the pace. Getting hit by an enemy serves to punish you by slowing you down, taking away rings or shields, or killing you, which sets you back. The enemies are very simple, usually with only 1 or 2 actions. They'll just move around or even just stand in place. They may shoot projectiles or just get in the way. What's also impressive is that every level has a unique set of enemies. Some are more aggressive, but all of them are very easily dispatched. They all are destroyed in 1 hit, barring those with some defense. Defeating enemies is a bit different from other platformers. When you jump, crouch while running, or do a spin dash, you curl into a ball. Being in a ball while in the air is how you use the character's abilities or shield effects. You can't use them otherwise. And rolling into a ball on the ground can increase your momentum when going down a slope, but the other main purpose for curling into a ball is to attack enemies. You can only damage enemies while in a ball. The only exceptions are when Pluto is flying, his tails will hurt enemies, and when Pete is gliding, his fists hurt enemies. It's not as simple as bugs where you have to land on an enemy to defeat them. Here, it doesn't matter which angle you touch the enemy. If you're in a ball, whether by jumping or rolling, you hurt them. If not, you get hurt. You really need to be mindful of this, as you won't be in ball form after bouncing off a spring or going off certain ramps. Oftentimes when moving fast, you'll want to press down so you go into a ball, which will protect you from enemies in the way. Being in a ball won't protect you from projectiles though, and some enemies can hurt you while in a ball anyways. Like other platformers, if you land on an enemy from above, you will bounce off them. But instead of a fixed height, how high you go is determined by momentum. The farther you fall before landing on an enemy or monitor, the higher you go. So if you fall from a great height and land on an enemy or monitor, you go flying back up. While enemies are still very simple, there's a lot of intricacies to them that make them seem more complex than your average platformer enemies. However, they end up being simpler in practice. The enemies are handled differently here than other platformers. Enemies in platformers can serve multiple functions. Most often, they serve as a small obstacle, but they can also be used to create unique challenges. For example, in Taz Country 2, the crook enemies mostly stand in place and throw one of their hooks, which goes forward and comes back. Simple enemy, but it's used in some creative ways. Like this level, where you're constantly moving up and a bunch of these guys are placed so you have to recognize the pattern and fly through. Or in this level, with the rising floor, where you have 2 of them behind walls where you can't get to them, so you have to dodge. All enemies are used in a variety of different ways to create unique challenges. Navigating through a bunch of zingers, using flitters as platforms, jumping on the barrels being shot out by the cannons. Enemies are very important to this game and are used to great effect to create specific challenges to be overcome. In Mickey, though, the enemies almost exclusively act as an obstacle to quickly pass by or defeat, rather than offer a specific challenge. There can be specifically designed challenges using enemies in a similar way, but they are a rarity. Most of the challenges are built around the terrain, with enemies just being obstacles. There's nothing like the examples I gave from Taz. Enemies are far less important to Mickey than to Taz or even bugs. The enemies in Taz are ingrained in the level design. Mickey's enemies are not. They still are important. Without enemies in these levels, the challenge would significantly decrease. They do play an important role. So it's not a problem that they aren't used the same way as Taz. They are very different styles of platformers. And the way Taz handles it might not be well suited to Mickey because of the pacing. It's very difficult to make deliberate challenges revolving around the enemies when you're moving this fast. It's not full speed all the time, there are slower moments, but the primary challenge is to be able to play fast and not stop. Using enemies more like Taz would likely make the game more stop and go, which is not suited to Mickey's gameplay. Enemy-based challenges are scripted in Taz. Taz's level design is much more tightly controlled as opposed to Mickey's more loose, non-linear approach. Enemies are part of the level design, and making enemies that work with this kind of level design is a very difficult task, and one Mickey struggled with before. Metropolis from Mickey 2 is a prime example of how wrong it can go. Thankfully, Mania is much smarter about enemy placement, and there aren't really any times it gets bad or annoying with enemy placement or design. The game has a bit of the opposite problem, where it's a bit on the easy side. I wouldn't say it's too easy to not be interesting, and I'd much rather have this than what Mickey 2 did, but there's not a lot of challenge being offered by the enemies. Exploration is an important aspect of this game, but it's handled differently than other platformers. Exploring the levels can get you more rings or lives or power-ups as you'd expect, but the primary reason to explore is to get the Chaos Emeralds. Hidden throughout the levels are these special rings. Entering them will transport you to a special stage where you play a minigame to win a Chaos Emerald. The amount of special rings varies from level to level, but generally hovers around 2 or 3 per act. They can be rather well hidden, some are obvious, but most you won't just run into. They tend to be hidden inside fake walls. There's generally a visual clue to what walls you can walk through, and sometimes you can even see the ring from outside. But the hard part in finding them isn't so much that the location is difficult to find or get to, it's more because of how open the levels are with so many branching paths. You are not going to go down every path in one playthrough of a level, and since not every path has special rings on them, you'll end up missing some rings and not have a chance to find them. You can backtrack for rings on different paths sometimes, but oftentimes levels will have points of no return, so you can't. Unless you already know where all the rings are in a level and rat out a path that gets you all of them, you're going to be missing quite a lot of rings. Now, normally this would be an issue for them to be missable like this. However, you're not expected to get all of them. You only need 7 of them. This isn't like Taz Country where you need to find every bonus stage to 100% the game. These two games have a very different approach towards exploration. Taz is all about methodically searching every nook and cranny for each bonus, while Mickey is more about quickly checking out anything suspicious as you go along. Because of how big and complicated the level design is with multiple routes, it would be very bad if you needed to find all the special rings. But because you only need 7, it works a lot better. There is, however, a downside to this. Because you only need 7, once you've gotten the 7th one, you're done. There's not much of a point to finding any more. And you can get 7 of them rather early in the game, which leaves the rest of the game with significantly less value and exploration. You can still find these rings even after having all the Chaos Emeralds, but they won't do anything for you. They do give you 50 rings, so they aren't worthless, and 50 is how many you need to activate your super form, so that's nice. But the value of them decreases dramatically once you have all the emeralds. Mickey 3 also had this same special ring system, but in that game, when you get to the halfway point, you can start going after the super emeralds. You have to give up your super form to do this, but you now have 7 more emeralds to collect, which adds more reason to go after these rings again. You can still get them pretty quickly and leave a big chunk of the game with little point to exploring, but it's something. Mania doesn't have any super emeralds, so unless you're bad at the special stages or at finding the rings, most of the game you won't have a reason to explore. One of the reasons I love Taz Country so much is the exploration value. There's tons of things to find and good reasons to do so. Well, maybe not for the first one, but for its sequels definitely. But these games handle exploration in a pretty different way from Mickey. Exploration in Mickey is more intrinsic, as opposed to Taz where it's more extrinsic. What does that mean? Let me explain. Extrinsic motivation is about doing something to get something out of it. In Taz Country 2, you find the bonus stages to get the Krem coins so you can access the Lost World and fight the true final boss, and get 102% completion. You're doing this more so because of the reward. Intrinsic motivation is all about doing something because it's personally rewarding, rather than because you'll get something out of it. Mickey relies more on intrinsic value and exploration. You explore to find the fastest routes to optimize your play, not because you'll get something out of doing it, but because it's rewarding in and of itself. There is some extrinsic value in exploration simply because you are rewarded for finding the special rings with a Chaos Emerald if you complete them, and having all of them grants you a super form, and the true final boss is Mickey. But even this is limited because, as I said, after getting 7 of them, the rest lose their value. The value in finding rings from then on is intrinsic, to get more rings to boost your score or maintain your super form for longer. Plus, getting all the Chaos Emeralds only has an effect on Mickey, none of the other playable characters. Mickey can fight the true final boss when he gets the emeralds, but no one else does. They don't really have an extrinsic reason to get the Chaos Emeralds outside of getting their super forms. Now, both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation are valid ways of rewarding the player, but intrinsic motivation is harder to get right. Ideally, every game would have some kind of intrinsic motivation just because the game is engaging enough for you to simply enjoy playing it. But when it's the primary way of rewarding the player, that's when it becomes tricky. I'm more on the extrinsic side of things. I like exploring and finding secrets, and I can still enjoy exploring for exploration's sake, but it can feel underwhelming when you're not rewarded for it. It's why Taz Country 1's exploration isn't as satisfying as 2, because you don't get anything out of it except a 101% on your file. I still enjoy doing it, but I enjoy it in 2 much more because it's much more rewarding. I enjoy exploring in Mickey Mania, trying to find those special rings, but once I've gotten all the emeralds, it stops being as enjoyable because you don't really get anything. As someone who enjoys exploration in games, there comes a point where the exploration loses its satisfaction. Instead of, yeah, found a ring, it's, oh hey, another ring. And this is where the intrinsic motivation comes in, because finding these rings isn't the only reason to explore. The other primary reason to explore is to find out which routes get you through the level faster. Mickey is about speed after all, so finding out the fastest way to play through these levels is a big part of it. And I'm sure a lot of Mickey fans really love this about these games. But for me, I don't really care about playing through them fast. I don't have that intrinsic motivation to learn how to play these levels faster. And that's not a fault with the game, that's just my taste. I've never been interested in speedrunning. I like to take my time with games, even fast-paced games. Not that I don't enjoy playing fast at all, but it's not where my interest lies. Again, this is not a fault with the game. The point in talking about this is that the game is limited in what it can offer those more interested in extrinsic reasons to explore. I kinda want more reasons to explore, maybe have some other kind of collectible you can get to unlock new levels or something. Like, have a bunch in each level, but you only need one per level for it to count. That would make it so it doesn't conflict with the level design. Some other Mickey games have these red rings you can find in levels. Maybe that could work here? I don't know, maybe I just want a game that isn't Taz Country and isn't trying to be like Taz Country to be more like Taz Country. Maybe I just like Taz Country a lot and should just go play that instead, and fair point. Not every game needs to be designed in the same way, and just because one way isn't completely to your taste doesn't mean it's a bad or invalid way of doing it. This by no means ruins the game for me. I don't suddenly stop enjoying playing through these levels once I have all the emeralds. I don't even suddenly stop trying to explore or even getting some mild enjoyment out of finding new ring locations, even if it is lesser than it would be before getting them all. But to actually talk about what happens when you find one of these rings, entering a special ring brings you to a special stage which you must complete to get a Chaos Emerald. These are 3D and you need to chase down the UFO that's holding the emerald. You win by getting close enough to it. You're constantly moving forward with no way to stop. All you can do is turn and jump. You have a time limit that you can increase by collecting rings, though you will lose rings if you run into an obstacle, and you will lose if you run out of rings or fall off the course. You move too slow to catch up, so you need to collect these blue balls. After getting a certain amount, you upgrade to Mach 2 and start moving faster. Mach 2 is enough to catch up if you're good enough, but you can also go to Mach 3, which is the maximum. These special stages are pretty fun and can get tense when moving fast and trying to keep up without falling off or going off-road, which slows you down. You need to manage time while also trying to go for as many blue balls as you can, so you can speed up as fast as possible. There are multiple paths with different stuff. Usually the faster path has rings while the slower has spheres, so you need to choose which is more beneficial at the time. You move the fastest when going straight forward. Turning or jumping will slow you down, so when you're at the point where you're just chasing down the UFO, you need to try and take the fastest routes with the most straight paths. If you fail a special stage, you cannot try again on the same ring. You can't even restart the stage or even exit the game, the ring will be gone. Again, this would be very bad if you needed to get all of them, but it's fine because you only need 7. Getting all the emeralds gives you the ability to use your super form. In order to activate it, you need 50 rings. While super, you move faster, can jump higher, and are completely invincible. But while you are super, your rings slowly decrease, and once you've reached 0, you'll revert back to normal. This is a pretty cool reward, but I prefer to not use it. It kind of takes away a lot of the challenge to just become invincible, and being able to trivialize a lot of the platforming. Don't get me wrong, it is fun to blaze through levels like this with how the physics work. It's quite a spectacle, but I would just rather play without it. I don't want to just break the challenge of an already easy game. I always thought the super forms were a weird reward for something like this, because you can get a game-breaking ability so early in the game. Now you're still vulnerable to pits and being crushed, but you're still destroying a lot of the challenge. Seems more like an endgame type reward. But I suppose that's the point, to motivate you to get better, to be able to find more rings early by giving you such a powerful ability as a reward. But that's just not what I want. And that does contribute to my issue with the exploration, because the reward you do get is something I prefer not to use. Also, ignoring the part about it destroying the difficulty. When you go super, you have to listen to the super form music instead of the level music. Now, it's better than the short loops of the older games, but I'll be damned if I interrupt Stardust Speedway or Mirage Saloon's music for this. Like, it's good, but I don't want to only listen to it. Honestly, I kinda get annoyed at the invincibility and speed shoes music, and they are only temporary. Like, why you gotta make the level music so fire and then interrupt it? But there is another kind of special stage. If you have about 30 rings and pass a checkpoint, some stars will appear over it. Jumping into it will bring you to blue spheres. These are the special stages from Mickey 3. In fact, a lot of them are the same ones from 3, and a lot of the footage is going to be from 3 because once you've fully completed all these stages, you can't just replay them, and I wasn't about to erase my progress. There are Mania exclusive stages though, so it's not all just copy and paste from 3. So the goal is to turn all the blue spheres red. Get rid of all the blue. You just touch them to make them red, but if you touch red spheres you will lose. Like the normal special stages, you are continuously moving forward and can only turn and jump. But you are kind of gridlocked. You can't turn whenever. You can only turn when you've reached the ends of the squares. You need to hit left or right before you reach that point to turn, which can be awkward and has led to a lot of losses. You don't have a time limit, but after a certain amount of time you will speed up, so you can't just safely take your time. These can get pretty nerve-wracking with how fast you're going and how small of a window you have to turn. And then of course making sure you don't hit it too early and bounce into the spheres you just turned red. These can be fun, but they're a little hectic for my liking. All you need to do to win is turn all the blue spheres red and you'll get a silver medal. But there is a secondary goal in getting a perfect by collecting all rings. There are rings lying around, but also if there is a square of blue spheres with some in the middle, turning all of the outer rings red will turn the entire square into rings. You need to do this to get all the rings, and you better make sure you left some lone spheres so you don't end the special stage before you can collect the rings. These become a whole new beast trying to perfect them. It's simple enough to complete them normally, but you really need to change how you approach them to get a perfect. Getting a perfect will grant you a gold medal, which overrides the silver one. Silver medals unlock extras like new abilities for Mickey, the super peel out from Mickey CD. This is basically a spin dash but you hold up, and when you let go you don't roll into a ball. I do like the animation for it, but it's just worse than a spin dash because you're vulnerable while doing it, and it's not even faster. Then there's the Insta Shield from Mickey 3. This is an attack you perform in the air that extends your hitbox and gives a brief invincibility frames, which can be good for bosses and some enemies, but it's not always the most reliable. It doesn't protect you from everything. These are cool unlockables, but there's a big issue. You can only have one of them at a time, and having either one will override the drop dash. The drop dash is just better than both of them, so why would I use them instead? There's also no reason why you can't have them all. Why would the super peel out conflict with the drop dash? And I could see the logic behind the Insta Shield conflicting, but it really doesn't. Mickey 3 Air proves that you can have both and it will work just fine. Anyways, more rewards for silver medals include debug mode, where you can place objects and enemies and travel anywhere, which is pretty cool. You can unlock the sound test, which is great. There's also Mean Bean Machine, which you can play with an AI or a friend. And a blue sphere mode. This is not replaying the normal blue sphere levels. This gives you a random blue sphere stage that is much harder than the normal stages. You can pick between normal and Mania stages, and the Mania ones have some new rules like green spheres which turn blue so you need to run into them twice, and then pink spheres which teleport you. I've only ever beaten one of these. Thankfully you don't need to play them for anything. And the last silver medal unlockable, which is the best one, is the And Pete mode. When this is on, you will have Pete follow you around like how Pluto follows Mickey. There's no point or benefit to doing this other than it's hilarious. And the best part is, this also works with Pete. You can have two Petes and it's glorious. What's even better is doing this will allow Pete to fight the true final boss, which only Mickey is able to do normally. And he gets a new ending where it was just a story he made up. That is amazing. So those are the silver medal rewards. Now what about the gold medals? They don't give you anything. They're just for bragging rights, which I'm fine with. You already get rewarded for the silver medals. There's nothing wrong with an extra challenge that doesn't really have a reward. When you're going for these, they will cycle through the stages every time, so you can retry one you've lost, but it will loop eventually. Once you've got a silver medal, it will stop appearing until you've got all the silver medals. Then it will cycle between all the ones you haven't got the gold medals in. Once you've got the gold, you can't play it anymore. After getting all gold, the special stage is replaced with this pinball game that you can play to get more rings or lives or shields. This is neat, but I don't know why you can't replay blue sphere stages. Not that I care too much since they are pretty pace-breaking. Trying to go for them was pretty tedious because of that, but they're optional so it doesn't matter too much. So I think I should go over the levels themselves. But before that, I need to address something. Most of the levels are taken from previous games. Only Studiopolis, Press Garden, Mirage Saloon, and Titanic Monarch are completely original. It's not just the themes of the zones that are reused. Level design is also reused. Entire parts of these levels are straight up copied from the original incarnations. Now it's not entire acts just copy and pasted, there's a mix of old and new level design. The way it's usually handled is Act 1 will be a sort of remixed version of the original incarnation, perhaps a combination of both the original acts with some original stuff added in, but then Act 2 will be almost completely original level design. So despite the reusal of level design, there is plenty of new stuff and new twists on old concepts. I can understand how it could be disappointing to some. Perhaps it helps that I'm not a big Mickey fan, but it doesn't bother me. The extent of it for me is just a few levels shared by Mickey 3 can be a little weird when I'm going through the same level design in both games. Green Hill is the first zone, and it is pretty simple in layout. Act 1 is straightforward with simple paths to take. It's mainly the normal path and a high path with a bottom area you can go to. There's not much in the way of gimmicks or special mechanics or set pieces that aren't found in other levels. Act 2 is more distinct, having these zip lines all throughout the level. Other than having a more complex layout than Act 1, it's not that different. This is the introductory level, and it does a good job at introducing the game and mechanics without overwhelming you. Chemical Plant decides to let loose. Right away you're greeted to a speed section that lasts a fair bit, and this happens a lot throughout the zone. While it can make Chemical Plant feel a bit automated, it's actually a smart move having a level like this as the second level. The first one eases you into the game, and this one shows you how fast it can be, gives you a taste of what it will be like when you've learned how the game works. Chemical Plant also isn't entirely automated. There's plenty of platforming and moving blocks, and having to get out of the water before you drown. Act 2 has this gelatinous substance that can be made bouncy, and you can go flying with it. Studiopolis is almost like a combination of the previous zones, more platforming with layered paths, though more complex than Green Hill, but also similar winding roads for speed sections like Chemical Plant. Act 1 has these teleporters, and Act 2 has these lottery machines. As you might be starting to notice, there's not a whole lot in the way of gimmicks to really discuss. Most zones don't have standout gimmicks that they build levels out of. It's mostly reliant on the core level design, with level-specific gimmicks and mechanics just add flavor. It's not like Taz Country, where they can build an entire level around climbing ropes, or a wind gimmick. A gimmick is sometimes used as a dirty word, but gimmicks are how you make standout levels. As shown with Taz, many levels have a gimmick to them that adds a unique challenge that they build off of that makes the level stand out. Mickey does have level gimmicks, but they aren't as strong or game-changing as other games. The way they make levels stand out is more so with the level layouts than the gimmicks. Now, some are more substantial than others. The teleporters and lottery machines of Studiopolis don't add any challenge to the level. They're mostly for spectacle, but something like Press Garden has these conveyor belts you can bounce off of, which gets a lot of use. Not to mention in Act 2 you can get frozen, which you can use to slide all over the place and break through ice. Lava Wreath doesn't have anything too substantial besides having lava and conveyor belts, but Oil Ocean has smog slowly filling the screen in Act 2 that you need to clear by grabbing these switches, or you'll gradually lose rings. Metallic Madness has these sections where you go into the background and turn tiny, but that doesn't really change how you play the level. But Titanic Monarch has these electric balls you use to fling yourself higher. Flying Battery has you fling yourself off these propellers, and has electric ceilings that interact with the electric shield, which is neat but doesn't change much. Stardust Speedway has cool stuff like these tunnels that make you go really fast, as well as these machines that when you break spawn platforms, and of course these launchers. Act 2 is pretty fun, but it ends way too quickly. Hydro City is the water level, so that does change things. Unlike other platformers, you can't swim. You move just like normal, but slower and floatier. Also, you can't breathe underwater, so you need to find air bubbles if you don't have a bubble shield. Though sometimes they take forever to appear. Honestly, Hydrocity might be my least favorite level. It is interesting in that it's sort of the opposite of the other returning zones, where Act 1 is more unique, while Act 2 is the one that's more like the original incarnation. But these boats don't really add anything. Moving through water can be a slog. These bubble sections are fine, but slow. It's weird because there are a lot of speed sections, but it can feel like it goes from high speed to very slow with hardly any in-between. It's not a bad level, but it could be better. And then there's Mirage Saloon, and I have a love-hate relationship with it. Okay, maybe hate is too strong. Act 2 is great. No complaints there. It's really fun, though a bit short for me. It's Act 1 that's the problem. It's a tornado section. You're riding on this plane the entire time. You have the same controls and can also control your altitude, but it's an auto-scroller. Auto-scrollers aren't really that well suited to Mickey. And while this isn't really a bad level, it's just kind of boring. All you're doing is standing here avoiding enemies that appear, and that's it. There is one part where you jump on a train, which is cool, but it's very short. I just wish it had a normal Act 1, because it would be my favorite zone if that were the case. Changes in gameplay can work, and I'm not inherently opposed to this idea of riding the tornado. I like the minecart and rocket barrel levels in the Taz Country games. They are also auto-scrollers, but they handle it so much better. For one, ironically, these are pretty fast-paced, giving you time when to jump or move to avoid obstacles, or to get collectibles or bonuses, while the tornado section in Mickey is slow. Like, aside from when the train is passing by, there's not much spectacle value here. But in Taz, these kinds of levels are full of spectacle. Like, if this was basically a rocket barrel section, I would be fine with it. Would still want a full normal Act 1, but at least it would be more fun than this. But the main point is most levels don't have gimmicks that completely change how you play. But I don't think the game is really harmed by this because the level design itself does a good job of making each level distinct from each other. No matter which character you pick, your playthrough will basically be the same aside from the ability of the character, with one exception, Pete. Pete has a slightly different playthrough, similar to Mickey 3, though the changes aren't as drastic. The main differences are Pete exclusive paths that are blocked by walls only he can break, and they tend to take advantage of his gliding and wall climbing, but they're usually only a small part of the level, and not every level has them. You do start in a different part of Green Hill Act 1, but it doesn't take long before you get to the main part of the level. One of the biggest differences is in Lava Reef Act 2, where you end up going down a different path and get a different boss, which is neat, but there's not much else different. In Mickey 3, there were a lot of changes. A bunch of levels had Pete sections, and several times bosses would either change in some way or you'd fight a different boss altogether. There was also that it was basically an epilogue, since it took place after Mickey's playthrough, while in Mania it is at the same time. There was even a new final boss Mickey didn't face. Now, Mania's Pete playthrough is probably the better one overall because it doesn't cut things. In 3, some levels just didn't have bosses, some were a lot shorter too, and Sky Sanctuary was just a boss, and you straight up didn't get to play Death Egg Zone at all. It makes sense for story reasons, but that's still content you can't play with one of the characters that isn't really replaced with anything. If you got a couple new levels to make up for that, it would be one thing, but that's not the case. Meanwhile, in Mania, while it's not significantly changed, you still get the whole game to play, and even one exclusive level. Mirage Saloon Act 1 for everyone else is the Tornado section, which is kinda lame as I said, but Pete gets an entirely different Act 1 that's built just for him. And given how much I love Mirage Saloon, it having a good Act 1 is enough to say, yeah, Pete is better here than in 3. Now, all of what I was just talking about was with Mania mode, the main mode of the game, but there is also Encore Mode. Encore Mode is a sort of hard mode / remixed version of the game. It's largely the same game, but some level design is different to make it harder. You actually start in Angel Island, but it's only a small part of it, which is lame. Not even all of Act 1 from 3, just a small piece of it. I'm not sure what the point is. The most significant level design change is Mirage Saloon Act 1, as in there is a new Act 1 that isn't the tornado, and thank you. I can no longer be frustrated by my favorite zone only having one good act unless I'm playing as Pete. It can just be a completely good zone. I just wish I could port this act into Mania mode. The special rings are also in different locations. Some of them are the same, but generally they're harder to find. And also, the special stages themselves are different and harder. It's like the first one here is continuing from the last one in Mania mode. They're not ridiculously hard, but definitely a step up in challenge, and can get quite nerve-wracking trying not to fall off. Anyways, the color palettes of the levels also change, which is neat, but for the most part I don't really like the changes. Some are good. I like the sunset of Green Hill, and Mirage Saloon starting similar to the main game, but then Act 2 is at night is really cool. But almost everything else I just prefer the original color scheme. Chemical Plant just loses the vibrancy in the background. Press Garden becomes an uglier shade of green. Oil Ocean is sunny, which I don't think suits the atmosphere as much, and the smog in Act 2 is just blue. Doesn't look like smog anymore. And Titanic Monarch just doesn't work nearly as well in green as it does in red for me. I will say Stardust Speedway Act 2 and Metallic Madness looking like the bad future versions in CD is a nice touch, but there's more misses with the color changes than hits. It's a minor thing, but it still kinda bothers me. Not enough for me to not enjoy it, of course. The main thing about Encore Mode is the tag team mechanic. Instead of picking a character, you start as Mickey and are given a choice between adding Donald or Goofy to your team. Goofy, of course. And now it's the two of you with Goofy acting like Pluto. Except you can swap between them, kinda like Taz Country. You can only swap when both characters are on the ground and the other character doesn't follow you as well as in Taz Country, so sometimes you just gotta wait for them to respawn in order to swap. But regardless, being able to swap between characters is really cool. Though I just tend to stay as Goofy most of the time. You don't have lives, but instead can collect the other characters through monitors, and the pinball bonus game allows you to get more characters. The characters you collect go into a reserve. You can't swap to the characters in reserve unless you die. When you do die, you lose the character that died, and one of the reserve characters takes his place. You game over if all the characters die. The only other way you could play as the reserve characters are these new monitors. One of them swaps the character you're playing as with the next reserve character in line. This is nice when you want a specific character, though it can be annoying when you accidentally hit one with a character you don't want to lose, because they just go to the back of the line. There's also these monitors that shuffle everyone. Sometimes you don't even change characters, and other times it gives you the exact characters you don't want. Mickey and Donald are the worst combo since you can't get to higher areas like this. You want Pluto, Pete, or Goofy in your party. You can't use Pluto to fly with anyone like Mickey can in Mania mode, but since you can just swap to him, it doesn't matter. Encore Mode is a pretty fun twist to the game. As a Taz Country fan, I do really like being able to swap characters in a similar fashion, but I'm not sure if this is my preferred way of playing. Having a full Mirage Saloon is a very convincing argument, but it's mainly not having access to the reserved characters easily. It can get a bit annoying when I have a combo I like and then accidentally swap one out, and then it takes a while before I can play as that character again. Maybe if there was a way to swap out your party to who you want at like a checkpoint or something. But regardless, it's not a deal breaker and still is a rather fun mode. At the end of each act is a boss, and the quality of them is kinda mixed. I'd say most of them are fine, but some are just kind of eh. The bosses are designed differently from typical platformer bosses. Take a shot every time I've said that in this video. Instead of dodging attacks while waiting for an opening to take advantage of, the bosses are usually always vulnerable if you're able to reach them or get past their attack. Not every boss follows strict rules, plenty of them deviate from this. The first boss is two balls that you can attack at any time. They aren't glowing. Even when they are glowing, you can hurt them. They just hurt you too. For this boss in Press Garden, you have to wait for it to attack these crates, which will break its saw, giving you an opening to attack. But he's still vulnerable while his saws are intact if you're willing to tank damage and hit him through invincibility frames. And this highlights a big flaw with the bosses. The ring system. Because you can just pick up your rings again, oftentimes it doesn't matter if you get hit. You can just hit the boss through invincibility frames and pick your rings back up. It makes the bosses feel more like a battle of attrition rather than skillfully learning the patterns and expertly dodging all the attacks and hitting back at the right time. In Taz, if you get hit, you lose the character and can't get them back, which means you have to go the rest of the fight without them and have to be careful. That could still happen here if you fail to pick up your rings, but most of the time it doesn't matter. Some bosses do a good job within the system. The Studiopolis Act 1 boss has you constantly running, so when you lose your rings you can't just pick them back up. You can only get more after landing a successful hit. Speaking of which, this is a boss that deviates as you can only hit him by hitting the blue rockets back at him. It offers a good challenge that can't just be cheesed. Even ignoring cheese, some are just really easy, like the Studiopolis Act 2 boss, where you can just attack him at any time. Like his attacks leave openings, but it doesn't matter because you can just jump up to him. You only really fight this boss legitimately as Pete because he can't jump high enough to hit him otherwise. That's the issue. There are good bosses here, like the Flying Battery Act 2 boss, where you need to fling him into the spikes to damage him. Or Heavy Shinobi, where you have to stun him when he's in the air because he freezes you when he's on the ground. The Hydrosity's Act 1 boss is really cool because you take the Mad Doctor's vehicle and use it against him. It's easy, but it's a really fun concept. And Metallic Madness Act 2 is where you're tiny and bring out smaller bosses you must defeat, and you can control how many you have to fight at a time. Metal Mickey is cool too as you run from him and then launch the small silver Mickeys at him. Then he turns into this thing and you have to attack its chest. The part kinda ends quickly though. It looks like it would last longer. But for all of those, there's just kinda lame ones like Chemical Plant Act 1 where you just jump into him and abuse the ring system. Flying Battery Act 1 where you wait until you can jump into it and then do so until it dies. And it's easier with Mickey and an electric shield. But as Pete, it's boring because it takes too long before you can reach it. Oil Ocean Act 1, you just jump into it a bunch. Stardust Speedway Act 1, you just wait for it to appear and then jump into it. Lava Reef Act 1, you just wait for it to destroy its armor, then keep jumping into it. Not very exciting. Hydro City Act 2 starts cool where you need to aim for these bombs so you can damage him and then spawn air bubbles. But after that, it just gets annoying as he can be hard to hit and it wastes your time spinning you around for a few seconds. Mirage Saloon Act 1 is also annoying because it's hard to tell when you can hit him due to the depth perception. The Pete version is better, but not special. Chemical Plant Act 2 is around a mean bean machine. Some people don't like this, but I actually think it's fine. I suck at it. I keep trying to set up combos, but it never gets me what I need. But it doesn't matter, because the Mad Doctor is even worse at it. I've never lost because he's just that bad. If it weren't so easy, then it would be a problem, but because you don't have to try to win, it's fine. The final boss is alright. You mostly wait for him to lower his shield to attack him, but the things connected to him are electrocuted, so you need to also wait for them to stop. The more you damage him, the more of them break off, giving you more openings and making it easier to hit him. In between opportunities to hit him, you get teleported to one of the other heavies where you just have to survive. You can fight back, but there's no point. But yeah, the bosses are a mixed bag. None of them are like bad or frustrating, and some are pretty fun, but most are either unremarkable or kinda lame. So the only things left to talk about are a couple of the extra modes. First is Time Attack. It's a simple time trial mode where you try to play the levels as fast as you can to get a good time on them. I don't get much use out of this mode as I don't really care about time trials, but it's good for those that do, and it's pretty convenient to use as you can instantly reset your run if you mess up by holding a button. Then there's Competition Mode where you can compete with a friend. It's not a race, it's about winning in more categories than the other. Time is a category, but there's also score, rings, total rings, and items. This forces you to play a bit differently than normally since you can't just get to the end as fast as possible. You need to make sure you pick up a lot of rings and items, while defeating enemies and finding other ways to increase your score, while also trying to get to the end faster than your opponent. This is local only, so you have to have a split screen, but at least they shrink it so you have your full view. Although there is an option to stretch the screen like how it was handled in Mickey 2, which is really gross. You can't play every level in the game, but there's a decent amount anyways. Some zones are just completely missing though, not sure why. You have options for what items will appear. You can have it be what they normally are, but also randomize them. But then there's teleporters only, which is really chaotic. How they work is they swap your position with the other player, which can boost you ahead or bring you farther back, and there are valid reasons to do either. And you also want to hit them just to get your item count up. This is probably my favorite way to play this because of how chaotic it is, though depending on where your opponent is, you might not be able to teleport. Competition mode is a fun side mode to play with friends. You can have up to 4 people, though I only was able to play against one other. Can't imagine how chaotic 4-player teleporters only would be. But it's nothing too special. Not something I'd just suggest when wanting to play something with a friend. Still a good addition. But that is Mickey Mania, the last in line of a series of rather unique 2D platformers that is really quite fun. The game is on the short end, but despite a playthrough only being a couple hours long, the game still offers a lot. Some people tend to complain when games are short, but short games extend that time with replay value. This game thrives on replay value with its multiple characters and unique abilities, and non-linear level design allowing for many ways of playing the game, not to mention Encore Mode. I've had to record more of this game than for many larger games, which should tell you something. But anyways, as I've said, I've only recently even started playing any of these games, and still wouldn't consider myself a Mickey fan. But I did end up rather enjoying Mickey Mania, as well as Mickey 3 and Pete. It was tough getting used to this style of platformer, when I'm more used to more typical ones, but it still was engaging enough. It's not my preferred style of platformer. Taz Country is still at the top for me. That's not gonna change. But Mickey Mania is still rather high. Though my experience with the classic series as a whole showed me how difficult making a game like this work must be, because I only really think 3 and Mania work as a whole. Not that the others are bad, but they have issues. So even though I do think highly of 3 and Mania, I wouldn't even consider myself a fan of the classic Mickey games, because I don't care that much about most of them. However, that could change if we got sequels to Mania. Come on, Disney, where's Mania 2? Well, by the looks of things, we aren't getting a Mania 2, and I don't know why. Mania was cheap to make and did really well, and it is the highest rated Mickey game in a very long time. They'd be fools not to get these devs back to make more of these games. But it looks like they're not going to do that. The team who made Mania are now doing their own thing. Disney didn't get them back for a sequel. And it's such a waste because so much of this game is just reused level themes. Look at how good the original zones are. Each one is amazing. Imagine a full game of that. A full game of these guys going crazy with unique themes. I kept bringing up Taz Country because that's my forte. But imagine if Taz Country Returns was the last Taz game. Imagine if there was no Tropical Freeze. Returns is an amazing game, but it reuses a lot from the first game. Now it does a lot of new and unique stuff with those things, so it's not like it detracts much, and it does a lot more with them than Mania does. But it would still be a tad underwhelming if they didn't take this amazing game and go all out with a sequel that didn't reuse stuff from the previous games. Tropical Freeze blew Returns out of the water for many reasons, one of which is it was able to let loose with original world themes. Mania is like Returns. It's a return to form while borrowing from those before it. But it doesn't have its own Tropical Freeze to go with it. That's disappointing because Mania is a great game, but it's held back and a sequel could break its shackles and allow it to truly shine. But no, Disney for some reason doesn't want easy money and goodwill. I don't know how Frontiers will turn out, but they haven't exactly had a good track record lately. Look, I'm not gonna buy Mickey Frontiers. I just have no interest. Maybe when we see actual gameplay it might look more interesting, but there are other open world games I'm much more interested in before I'd consider this. I'm not going to buy it, but I would buy a Mania 2. I'm not a Mickey fan, but I would buy Mania 2. I'd buy a Mania 3. I could become a Mickey fan if they made more, but they won't, so they've lost me. Mania was the first Mickey game where I was truly interested in playing it. I had some mild interest in Mickey Boom when that was first revealed, but that interest didn't last, and oh boy did it not come back once the game came out. But I've just never really had a desire to play them, and it's probably going to stay that way by the looks of it. Maybe someday they'll realize their mistake, but until then, I'm done with Mickey. I feel for Mickey fans having to deal with such inconsistency. I don't know how I'd handle a series I love being so inconsistent like that. Oh, wait, paper bugs. I should probably get back to that then, shouldn't I? Yeah, I'll get on that. See you later.
Nice.
Okay, I'm actually going back to Paper Mario now. I intended to after the last review, but then I realized how close to April it was and had to scramble to get this video ready. I cut it very close. If I had started working on this video a couple days later than I did, I might not have gotten it done in time. I gotta say, this one burnt me out a bit. Despite being a short game, I had to do more recording for it than most other games I've covered. It was silly. Having to do 7 playthroughs minimum, plus 2 playthroughs of 3 and Knuckles, plus getting footage from the rest of the games. When you plan on making a review for Sonic Mania, you don't think it would take that much effort. But here we are. But yeah, thanks for watching, and thanks for being patient if you've been waiting for more Paper Mario content. It's the next thing I'm doing, and I might just plow through the rest of them without breaks for other videos. Maybe one in between Color Splash and Origami King, but definitely not as big of a gap that I've been on now. So next are those Sticker Star highlights, then a special Sticker Star related video, then finally Color Splash. If you feel like I've earned it, please consider supporting me on Patreon. And let me thank my patrons, Enemy, Just a Blank, Kaiju, Bowie, Waluigi #1, and Curb.